All right, welcome everybody. This is the Special Education Community of Practice, and today our topic is on the extended school year. We have Chris McCrea from the School Improvement Specialist team here to host our session. And so I'm just going to turn it right over to him and let him introduce himself to everybody.
Thank you, Ann, and I appreciate you having me on to be able to host today. Thank you to all of you who have taken the time out of your busy schedule to attend. I really want to start out by saying that this is something that I wanted to do early on because I think this is the time to start thinking about these types of decisions. And as we talk through this today, please unmute yourself, ask questions, share ideas. The more involved you are, the better off it's going to be, not only for myself, but just for everybody that's participating. But just generally, are you, and you don't have to answer, but just thinking about, are you starting these conversations? Are you considering these ideas as you're getting this year rolling, although we're a little bit more than a third into it, so that when those extended school year determinations need to be made, that regression and recoupment data, which I'll talk about, has been acquired, and those teams are able to make decisions based on data and not just on individual hopes and wishes for the district, or the other way around. We're not making decisions because the district isn't able to meet those needs. So as I talk through this, just kind of consider those ideas. Have you thought about those kind of conversations yet? Are your teams having them? And then as we go through this, please feel free to share. I've been with this school improvement team for about 4 years, and I have provided this training a couple of different times. And as I talk through it, I really just want you guys to understand that there are both best practice as well as regulations built into this type of presentation, and I'm hoping to be able to distinguish between some of them as we build into this. There is an agenda. And do you have access rights for me, Ann, or are you doing it?
So right now I have it. We do have a few comments that you're kind of coming in choppy. So let me see if I can. I have the slide up if you want me to just share.
Is that any better?
A little better.
Okay. So part of my problem that I've had over the last couple of days is my computer has come in and out and internet is very spotty. So hopefully as I speak, this will be a little bit better.
It's not as choppy. Thank you.
So Ann, do you want to go on to the next slide, please? So as I mentioned, I'm going to look at how IDEA defines the extended year. This is the regulations that we're talking about, as well as how the OPI monitors ESY. And then some of the things to consider might be more best practice. I'm considering a breakout, but I think it would be better if we just do a whole participation group versus breakouts because of the lower numbers that we have. And then just try and build out what your practice looks like, get an idea of what other people and other districts are doing that may be beneficial to everybody who's on this call today. Next slide, please. Somehow I got muted.
You did,
I don't
Chris.
know how
I was
much you
trying
missed,
to.
but next slide, please.
Hold on, Chris. You're on two different things, so I think that's what's causing the echo. Can we mute one of your devices?
Is it still echoing?
It's echoing a lot. Yes.
How about now?
It's a little better. Let's see if we can change. There we go. Next slide.
Okay, let's try this.
Oh, that's much better.
And apologies for any of the technical situations. Those are the fun things that happen when these meetings are virtual versus in person. So looking at what IDEA says about ESY, and I've highlighted a couple of things, bold-faced a couple of things, because those are really what we want to consider when we're talking about 300.106. Number one, when we talk about extended school year, this is determined on an individual basis. It's not that the student is enrolled or the student has a disability, so automatically they qualify. We have to look at it from what is the current needs of the student and use the data that's available to determine the need for each individual student who we're making those determinations for. Another thing to consider is that this is a team decision. It's not a unilateral decision. If a district or a parent is making the request for extended school year, it takes a full team meeting. It cannot be done through an amendment, a phone call, or a letter stating that they are going to honor extended school year services for a student, or they're not going to honor extended school year services for a student. So again, this is legal regulations and needs to be followed to the letter in order for this student to qualify or make the determination that a student doesn't qualify for extended school year services. Next slide, please. And I think that there's a question that I had based on that previous slide.
Okay.
If you want to go ahead and put that up there. And again, these are not very difficult in depth, but it's just that idea of trying to really solidify what each slide is trying to explain. So this first question here, districts can make a unilateral decision for providing extended school year services. Is that a true or a false? And do you want to go ahead and pull up the results of that and we'll see what we've got? Absolutely. Everybody nailed it. This is one of those situations where it can get a district into a lot of trouble by making that unilateral decision. So really important that you come together as a team and it's not done through an amendment and it's not done through a discussion of over the phone or through coffee in the coffee break room, but it's done through a full team meeting. And extended school year services include a meeting notice as part of that team meeting. If it's not done during the annual IEP, the meeting needs to be held at a later date, which we'll discuss here in a bit. Another thing to consider regarding 300.106 is that the student has specifics in order to qualify. And number one, the student is a child with a disability. They've already been determined eligible and they are receiving services, or if they've had an eligibility determination and are yet to receive services, that can be discussed and determined during the initial IEP. This is not something that is offered to every student, and it's not happening during the school time. This is beyond the normal school year, and it outlines through the child's IEP. There is no cost to parents. The team makes the determination on how that plan is going to look, what the services are going to be, including things like potentially transportation. And then it also meets the standards of the state agency, which is something that we'll discuss here in just a bit. So I do have another poll question. I think each of these slides comes with a poll question. And again, if you can just answer at your discretion to identify whether or not I clarified this slide. Go ahead and look at the results of this one. Fantastic. We're all 2 for 2. So I want to open it up really quickly and ask, has anybody ever run into a situation where a unilateral decision has been made, or a parent has been denied by a district, or the parent has requested and demanded, and then the district just follows suit for that parent in fear of having a due process?
I haven't had that happen, Chris. I've had where the team has made a determination for ESY and then the student does not show.
Okay. And there again is the idea that the team has provided its best effort to ensure that this student gets the opportunity. And then whether the parent is able to produce the child is out of the hands of the district. It's out of the hands of the team's decision. And so then the district wouldn't be held any liability against that, or any concern there, because they're trying to do what they can. And as long as they've developed a plan and tried to do what they can, I would say that they're okay. One of the things I would ask Valerie, do you know if that team ever tried doing anything when the student wasn't attending to help them to get to the attendance, or to call out to the parent and say, is there a situation that we might be able to help out to be able to get this student to attend?
Yes, so I know that they've done daily calls. We've actually went and knocked on parents' doors before.
Sure.
So
Going above and beyond just creating the plan, it sounds like.
mhm.
That's outstanding. Do you recommend that they contact log is used to be able to document those efforts?
Yes, we are really trying in our district to make sure that we're all using the contact log that's an Infinite Campus. Some teachers have a different log, and but they do have that documentation that's included in their file then.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that parent can't come back and say we didn't know about it, or it wasn't, nobody had shared anything with us, and the district has their backing. Thank you for sharing that, Valerie. Does anybody else have any situations that are unusual? Not hearing anything, Ann. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. So this is another one of those critical pieces where we need to understand that it's made upon data decision. Data drives all of these decisions. Individuals can make a recommendation, but if they don't have data to back it up, it's simply just that, a recommendation. The data needs to come prior to the decision. And if that decision has or doesn't have data available in order to be made, then the team needs to postpone this determination and come back at a later date with the data that's available. This is really important to understand in terms of what kinds of data is collected, how is it collected, and where can we access this data from. There's 2 types of data that are necessary, and the first is regression. Regression is when a student is learning a skill and then they don't practice that skill and they lose that skill, or they lose parts of that skill because they're not being provided those services, because they're not in school to be able to receive services. Therefore, that skill is starting to regress. And that regression is one of those critical pieces of data that can be gathered by saying, here's where the skill is currently, and then over this time where the student's not receiving services, we then start over and reassess, and we can determine that they've lost this amount of skill over that time that they weren't being provided services. And then the second is the recoupment data, and that's the time that's needed in order to regain that skill. And again, you're going to collect this data similarly to the regression data by starting out with your baseline of identifying what that time frame is for the student. And then while they're out of school, not receiving services, then they come back and you start that process over with where they're at, how long it takes for them to get back to that current baseline of what you started with prior to them going on their break. So those two types of data, the regression, the skill that's lost, as well as the recoupment, how long it takes to retain or to re-achieve where they were before they had that extended break, are the types of data that you're going to want to collect. And you can collect that in many different places. It can be done in the general ed or classroom setting. And we're working mainly on academic goals when we're talking about extended school year. And somebody can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe that behavioral skills, self-help independence skills are skills that should be at the forefront when we're talking about extended school year service supports. But somebody might be able to jump in, maybe somebody who deals with students that have high needs behaviors or that really struggle with that self-regulation and self-independence.
Chris, this is Val again.
Uh-huh.
We do have some students that the team will make a determination based off of behavior because
Mhm.
it impacts their academics so much.
Okay.
In that structure and that routine. So
with that, are you also seeing them building academic skills along with behavioral skills when you're talking about what they're working on?
well, we haven't real like we're maintaining. Like I wouldn't say we're teaching new skills or anything.
Sure.
ESY, but yes, most of the time when we have students that are coming in for the behavior component, there is an academic or a self-help component along with that.
Okay. So it's not isolated to just behavior.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's a good way to look at it. I think integrating the idea would be better than just saying we're going to focus strictly on behavior or we're going to focus strictly on self-help and independence. It's a collaboration along with that academic component. So again, thank you for answering. I'm going to ask Doug. I'm going to ask Doug to kind of weigh in on this one a little bit.
I can't, I swear to gosh, somebody stole my raise your hand button. I can't find it half the time when I'm logging in. We have done that at times for kids with autism to come in for a day or two before school starts, particularly if they're going into a new setting, so that they can familiarize themselves with the setting, move around. Sometimes it's like, hey, why don't you hang out in class? We're going to ask you to do some stuff to kind of reestablish instructional control there. So those, and it's not academically related, it's either familiarization with the new environment or refamiliarization with the environment, or it's just kind of a, hey, remember when you're here, it's different than when you're at home, and let's try this now without hardly any other kids around for a partial day, rather than starting in when everybody's here.
Absolutely. So do you write that into the IEP, or is that something that just a couple days before you contact the parent and say, hey, parent?
Typically, our guidance has been to write it into the IEP.
Yes.
You know, how much it is ESY, we've always just, well, write it as ESY because there's more protections to that from the parent side. So it has typically been written in as ESY, but you got a good relationship. You could do it in the minutes or in the notes, or even could just be a handshake deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I was hoping you were going to say that because that's critical pieces to make sure that data is being collected through an actual plan versus just saying, hey, you know, we're going to reorient this student a couple days beforehand. Let's give mom a call and see if she's available. So thank you for that, Doug.
And particularly
anyone else? What's that?
With new environments, we actually have a thing out on the autism blog about how to teach kids how to use a locker.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the nice thing about these kind of services is that you can really be creative in terms of what you're trying to support the students on. It doesn't have to be just strictly A, B, and C, right? So if you're talking about reintegration to something that they were familiar with, and then when they left, they need to be refamiliarized with it, that could be a great thing to consider versus, hey, we're only going to work on math or reading or writing. So again, thank you for sharing, Doug. Anyone else have anything they want to add?
There's a couple of comments.
Yeah,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
I interrupted somebody.
That's okay. You can go ahead.
I was just going to mention there was a couple comments. Julia mentioned that they call that a jump start,
Uh-huh.
and Valerie agreed with Julia and said that is what we do. And then Doug has shared a document. Doug, do you want to tell us what you shared here?
Yeah, it's just how to open a combination locker. It's some links
Okay.
out to a couple of videos related to that topic. I mean, I'm always, if I mention something, I want to give the link and kind of, drive people to the blog and stuff. So.
Awesome. Thank you.
So how do you add that if you do like the jump start onto the IEP? I do that with a lot of my kids, but I don't consider that ESY.
I don't know if this is right, but we've been putting that like in the notes section of the IEP. I don't know if that's
Sure. Sure. And I think the big thing when you think about whether it's right or whether it's wrong is that you're doing something to document your plan, and you're actually going through with a true plan versus, like I said, just, hey, we have a couple of days before, here's a good idea, let's go ahead and do it. Julia, you said it's called a jump start. Do you use that type of language? What kind of language do you use when you're talking about part of this as the plan?
Like, can you see me? We put jumpstart in quotes,
Okay.
and we specify like student benefits from a reorientation to the classroom setting
Yeah.
before start of school, so that they can acclimate, meet the teacher, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then we just kind of like, so we'll say it's a jumpstart, and so we'll contact parents at the beginning of the school year. And we just kind of put it in the notes, and we tell the parents, hey, look out, we're going to be contacting you, because we feel this would be a benefit for the student to start the year smoothly. Versus like, we know they're not going to lose skills, but they'll benefit having that time to process that they're going to be back at school, and then there's new expectations. So.
Okay. So during your IEP team meeting, you
Yeah.
actually include that in the plan.
Yeah, we put it in the notes. And then we just, and it comes up when we discuss ESY. Here's why it's not ESY, but student will benefit from this. And so it usually ends up in your prior written notice as well. We considered ESY, however, we felt the student would benefit just from a meet and greet with the new classroom teacher, because sometimes over the summer, like, that teacher leaves. So the one we had in the fall isn't going to be the one in the spring. So it's a good way to
Your orientation.
yeah, so when we kind of put it in the prior written notice.
Thank you.
But under the discussion of, we discussed ESY, felt that was inappropriate, and then we go down the steps,
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and
in
again,
lieu of ESY, we agreed to contact the beginning of the school year, blah, 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 so.
that's a great way to document it, because you're saying
Yeah,
we considered ESY, we identified that it wasn't really necessary. However, we
Yeah.
have a back to school plan of some
Yes.
sort, and this is what that plan is going to look like. And I
yes,
think that is just as valuable and important to include versus doing a full team ESY plan to say, we're going to do X number of days for X number of weeks. Just, hey, just letting you know, we're going to reorient these students at some point before the school year, and ESY is not a full-blown necessity based on this student's needs.
yeah, and that usually
Outstanding.
occurs because teachers usually have the PIR week, and it's when like our SPED teams can get in the building, because I'm with the co-op, so we
Okay.
don't start. Sometimes my schools start before I'm even back.
Mhm.
So we try to align at least one of the PIR days, and that's when we just orient everyone.
Smart. Really smart. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else have any other ways that you document those situations that may be unusual?
Should we test them out?
Yeah, really quickly, the very last piece, and I've already mentioned this, full team meeting is required, and it can be done at the annual, but if you are not able to make that determination because you maybe don't have the data available and you need to reconvene, it's always important to put a date of when that team's going to reconvene. If you're not exactly sure, you could even put up to the last day of school, as long as it's before that or up until the first day of extended school year services to begin. As long as it's not after that date, it can be before that date. But then you must come back as a full team and meet. So try to identify an agreeable time and date, set that date, and hold your team to that date. Yeah, let's go ahead and pull up the next couple. I think there's maybe 2 on this one.
Oh, let's see. Did it launch?
Not yet.
It went to sleep on me. Hold on, let me close it and come back into it.
We can also move on and then come back to the next 3.
It's not allowing me.
Okay, we can just look at the questions here in a bit. If you want to go on to the next slide, we'll just keep going. Once again, technology.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
So when we talk about the preschool and the transfer, there's a couple of things that are necessary to really understand. As we mentioned, there always needs to be that team meeting to decide what that plan's going to look like. And if you have a student who comes in from out of state or out of district and extended school year is part of their current plan, you as a team are going to have to come up with a strategy, a plan to be able to implement extended school year services either in the same fashion or comparatively to what's from the previous IEP. So if the district is getting a new student, that new district is responsible for providing the services of extended school year. Now, if you look at the 4th bullet down, if we have a student who is transferring, but it's not because they're coming from a new out of state or out of town district, but it's mainly because of the structure of that school. For an example, a student transitioning from the middle school that is in an elementary district to a high school that's in the same town, but the districts are different, and the extended school year services were developed in the previous district, that previous district is still responsible for providing extended school year until enrollment and start date of the new school district. So the middle school in this example would be responsible for extended school year when that student is transitioning from middle school to high school. It wouldn't be the incoming district in that case. If they're coming new from out of the area due to moving, now we're talking about the new district is going to be responsible. But if that district develops the plan and the student is just transitioning based on structure of the districts, then it's going to be the outgoing, the previous district who's going to be providing ESY services. And really the reason behind that is because they're the ones who create that plan. And they're the ones that are responsible until the transition has actually occurred and the start of the new school year, where the high school then becomes the new case manager for that student. Up until that point, the middle school is going to be the one that's responsible. at the very bottom, and I think this is just kind of a common judgment, is that if a student does transfer in or transitions up, you don't want to ignore what that ESY is going to look like. And you don't want to just pass it on to the next person real quickly or to the next case manager and say it's your responsibility. This is a responsibility of the district moving to the new, or the district leaving and transitioning for structure from the old. So don't just ignore it. Hold that full team meeting. Find out what it is that needs to be done so that the ESY can be implemented as written into the IEP. It may take an amendment by the team to be able to say, here's what we can comparatively offer versus here's what is provided from the previous district. Is your poll working again, or oh, you put it into the chat?
Chris, it's not allowing me to grab another question, so I put your first question in the chat.
Okay.
If people want to pick A, B, C, or D. We'll just keep them on their toes, keep them trying different ways.
Sure.
I like that it's typing you're talking while you're talking.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm seeing a correct answer there. And everybody is nailing it with the regression and recoupment. Again, the skill and then how long it takes to retain the skill. You want to go on to the next slide, please? Actually, let me stop you there before you do. Does anybody have questions? This can be a little bit confusing, and there are times where we'll get calls from the monitoring side or the technical assistance side, and they'll be like, who is responsible for this, and what do we have to do if we have a new district, if we have a student come into our district who has ESY. So I just want to try and make sure we have good clarification on this.
You want me to ask your other question?
Yeah, throw it up there. Let's see what happens. Yeah, everybody's right on that one. It's not an option. It's part of their plan. It's part of what the previous team agreed upon. Then it's in the best interest of the student. It's not a decision for the district to say we can't provide. It's not something where the parent says, maybe we can just remove it. If it's in the IEP, then it needs to be something implemented. Okay. I think there's one more question on this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe two.
I think there's two. So the choice would be incoming or outgoing.
Valerie, do you want to clarify what your response was?
I I thought I heard you say when they enroll in school, then the school is responsible.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around.
Maybe.
So to reiterate, so we're talking about bullets 2 and 3 on this slide. So that student comes either from in-state or out of state to a new district.
So not
Yeah.
during the summer necessarily. I guess that's where my mind went.
Well, the
like-
reason why, yeah, and I threw in the summer in there because let's say extended school year already started June 1, and that student enrolls a week later, so June 8,
Mhm.
and they have extended school year services on there. That incoming district is going to be responsible for finding a plan to be able to support their extended school year. So
Got
it
it.
would be the incoming district. Now, the second example, so there's some districts that have an elementary and then a separate high school district in the same town. Dillon is an example. They have an elementary district and then they also have the high school district. So when a high school student, or I'm sorry, when a middle school student in Dillon graduates and moves up into the high school, they actually are switching districts, but not because the team or the family moved, but because the structure of this district's changed. And in that case, that old district, the middle school, is going to be responsible for providing the ESY until that student is starting in high school. Then that case manager changes and the new plan for the following year would be amended, discussed, and then implemented at the high school level. But when the structure is the reason why there's a transfer, it's the previous district versus the new district.
So if they're only a K-8 school and they funnel to a totally different district high school, the K-8 district provides the ESY service.
Yes, because it's the structure of the district is changing, not the residents of the family. It's not a move in transfer. It's a lateral shift from one elementary district into whatever that feeder high school district is.
And Chris, are you able to see the chat? Doug put in some guidance from the OPI Special Education Guidance Manual.
Yeah, I can see the chat.
Okay.
Doug, that's a lot of words. Do you want to just give a quick review summary of what that says?
No, not giving
Okay.
your fourth bullet point.
But
There's
go ahead.
no.
You said something about the fourth bullet point. Sorry.
The fourth bullet point is a change in policy that I was unaware of. So I'm not sure how that answer that I posted from the guide would address that. So I'll just follow up with you specifically on this.
Yeah, I'm wondering if our guidance is somewhat outdated. Let's see.
In the past, it was when the kid leaves the K-8 district, that district's responsibility ends much similar to high school graduation was the guidance in the past. Because they're no longer eligible for services in that K-8 district because they have graduated the 8th grade, the next district would be responsible, as in the text that I posted from the guide, that next district would be responsible for providing the ESY services as soon as that kid enrolls in that district, which could be June 2nd, or it could be August, 10th type thing. So I'll just follow through with you on that. The guide may need some clarity or something. That makes sense?
It does, yeah. And I can go back and pull up the actual citation of where it was pulled from and share that out with you guys. But according to our guide, it looks a little bit contradictory to what the regulations say. So, and again, I'm wondering if our guide is somewhat outdated to what the updated policy is. There are a lot of that happening, as you may know, towards some of the previous guidance in our guidance manual.
Chris,
Yeah.
can I ask a question?
Yeah, please do.
With monitoring and IDEA, we have quite a few families that are transient.
Uh-huh.
So what if we have marked ESY? The family doesn't show, we keep trying to make contact with them. And then we find out that they've enrolled in like Billings, say in August.
Yeah.
As long as we are documenting, we're okay with that, or?
Well, again, it's more on the onus of the family to produce the student versus the district's failure to implement the IEP as written,
Okay,
the way that you're stating it.
okay,
So I would say definitely make sure you're documenting those unusual situations and the district's effort to try and continue to provide that. And if all of a sudden you find out that the student has left, there's nothing really that the district could do in those situations. And I think that's a common thing that happens around the state. And part of the reason why we get calls from districts saying, this kid just enrolled here, they have extended school year, but we don't even understand what needs to be done. Do we really have to do something about it? And the response to that is yes, you have to meet, you have to go through the process, you have to identify what you as a district are capable of doing comparably to what is already in that IEP. So yeah, I think you make a very good point that this is a common thing, but documenting it's really going to support that you guys are doing your effort and you're not failing to implement the IEP as it's written. Any other thoughts?
Chris, do you want me to put that other question on there, or do you want to skip that one?
I think we pretty much hit it in ad nauseum. We can go on to the next slide, please.
Okay.
So from our side, when we come in to look at extended school year, the first thing that we're looking at is the team made a determination, and you have those different boxes. You have the box that says ESY was discussed and is not needed. The second box says ESY is discussed and is needed. And then the third box says that ESY was determined that or was discussed, but a determination could not be made and will be made at a later date. The second part of that is that we look at number one, do you have a date in place to be able to come back as a full team? And then number two, is there a plan that identifies what ESY is going to look like? Not a specific plan that outlines the exact location and the teacher and all that, but just a generalized plan that says, here's what's going to occur for ESY. And then part of that is, what are the goals that are going to be identified and worked on during ESY? And they can be marked either with the box in the goals themselves where it says extended school year services, or it can be outlined either in the section, the editor of ESY in AIM, or through the PWN or through the notes. The next thing is, again, the full team came back and they met. So when we're looking at an IEP team determination at a later date, we're going to look at the meeting notice. Is there a meeting notice for that later date? Did the team come back and make that determination change through an amendment, which includes determining with PWN to outline what that discussion and decision was? So a few things that we look at identify whether a district is compliant, one, but then also putting in their best practice to ensure that the students' needs are being met and FAPE is being met. Any questions on this slide here at all? The final one, bullet 3, is really important too. You can't implement something in the IEP without parent approval. So you do need to make sure that not only did we hold the team meeting, but we have meaningful parental participation and they agreed to it prior to us implementing ESY. Or not implementing if your team determines it's not.
All right, I'm going to launch another question. Or not launch, but put it in the chat.
good. Yeah, this is not a unilateral decision, as I said before. This is something that can get a district into some trouble. And I think it has in the past where a district's just made a blanket email or a letter or a phone call to the parents and said, nope, we're not offering it. And that is highly non-compliant. So well done on answering this question. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Oh, I think you missed just one.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. As I mentioned, there's a couple different ways that you can do this. And it's most common that you just go back into the IEP and you check that box. These are going to be a measurable annual goal will be part of the extended school year service. But if not, just a couple of recommendations. There's no required specific format. There's no actual form that needs to be completed. It's just, here's some recommendations to consider when you're talking about building out that plan. What's the duration and frequency going to look like? From this potential time frame to this potential time frame, and about how long and about how many days a week. What kind of services are going to be offered? This again can be marked through the goals, as Valerie and Megan both mentioned. They have some unusual circumstances at times. You might want to identify some of those additional things, like Doug had mentioned, also with the reorientation part of it. So what are those services going to look like? What goals are going to be worked on? And then the provider and where it's going to be held as best as it can be noted. And that could be changed. Again, don't be so specific that you're holding them to a specific person in a specific location. And then finally, this is something that just can't be by anyone. Staff need to be certified. Service provider can be providing the services, but again, they have to be certified. One of the things that you want to avoid is having someone like a paraprofessional be the ESY teacher. Although they can provide services in the school setting, they are unable to as an ESY provider. Any questions on the plan, ways to document, who can and who cannot provide services? Okay, so that kind of goes through the process. Does anybody want to just open up and share? How do you acquire your data? What are some of the discussions that you are questions that you are sure to have when you're talking with your team members? Just any general information you might be able to provide that could be supportive for somebody else on this call. You want to go to the next slide? I just kind of want to open it up to everybody. What are some of the things you do to gather data? How do you train your staff in order to gather data? Or are you designated, or are you designating someone else to be that person for all of these determinations? How does that work within your own district?
Feel free to share.
Yeah, just jump in.
We obviously look at our progress reports and our progress monitoring. A lot of times we look at the breaks that we have, like some kids we look at like the weekend and how long does it take them to recoup those skills that they may have left on Thursday or Friday? Does it take them till Wednesday? Or we look at Thanksgiving break, and ours is definitely a team determination that involves one of the building administrators and the parents and the teachers. A lot of times we are looking at what kind of, especially for our littles, what early learning skills are they obtaining at that point? And if they have that break in services, are we going to see significant regression and take time for recoupment? So I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but
No, absolutely. Right now, it's just kind of share your best practice. What about training for providers to be able to, or not providers, for teachers or whoever's kind of doing those evaluations to ensure that they're gathering data that's going to be supportive in decisions? Is there any of that going on, or is it more about just direct observational?
no, we use both qualitative and quantitative data when we're making those decisions. As far as qualifying for ESY.
Hmm.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to identify if there's like a set process that you're using versus just sending someone out and saying, okay, keep an eye on these students and report back to us, like you said, maybe over a weekend. So on Friday, I want you to identify where that skill is, and then on Monday, I want you to check it again, or over Thanksgiving, or so what does that data collection kind of look like? And it, again, it doesn't have to just be Valerie. Anybody can jump in and just share whatever kind of practice you guys are doing, because as you know, these are more valuable when people are providing input from multiple places versus kind of a unilateral share.
I guess I do a lot of fluency checks. We try to do them daily. I mean, there is some, up and down throughout the weeks or week. But then you can see big gaps if it's needed, like over Christmas break. I think my hard part about it is there is like normal regression from kids. Like I just took a training and they said up to 30% now kids are losing over the summer. So that's like my big, I don't know, like confusion now with the ESY of just like how much regression is like normal versus like ESY, because I feel like all kids would benefit from summer school or ESY, but where do you draw the line, I guess?
Yeah. So how much is qualifiable, right? And I think, do you guys feel, and I haven't been in the class since COVID, but do you feel that that regression may even be more evident since they've come back in the last year and a half to 2 years versus when it was pre? And again, I think you have a very valid point. It's really hard to make that determination at times. So that's why it's really important that it doesn't come from one person or a group of people, or I'm sorry, one side, but it takes that full team to be able to make that determination, looking at all of that data. Okay, so typical peers are losing at 30%. This student is, and what's that comparative? So that might be another example of trying to gauge that additional regression or that additional recoupment data in order to compare it to the norm. Thank you. That was great. There was something in the chat that I just saw too. I asked for data on goals. Is that what I saw? Carly, you want to expand on that a bit? Yeah, I think that that's one of those things where the more people that you can gather the data from is, oh, okay, no problem. But the more people that you can gather that data from, the more comprehensive your review can become as well, rather than, and not saying it was wrong, right, or indifferent, having just one person do all of that data collection sometimes can sway that decision one way or another in favor of what they believe and what they feel and what they see versus having multiple people's input and that shared team approach to be able to get that data. But yeah, daily data, do some of you do daily versus weekly versus even further out? what's the most common for you? I mean, like just in general, would you rather go daily? Would you rather go monthly? Would you rather go weekly? Is it based on the individual student? What do you guys look at?
For me, it's also on the goal. Like we do read naturally, so you can easily do that every day and it takes a few minutes. But some of the others, like the reading assessments where it kind of levels the kids, we might just do that once a month. So it all depends. Where like math facts, we could do that. We might practice it every day, but then I might only take data once a week for that. So it's
Okay,
so
so
dependent.
so you're looking at the skill and the type of goal that's being done. Okay, so it's a little bit more subjective that way. Outstanding. Anybody else have anything to share? We do some benchmarking daily is done and done. Okay, so very similarly, Carla does to what Megan was saying. It just kind of depends on what kind of data needs to be collected and the frequency behind that. Okay, outstanding. Well, I appreciate you guys taking the time to share all of your information. Like I said, it's more supportive when people are able to collaborate and share ideas versus just kind of sitting and taking information in. Does anybody else have any other thoughts or ideas, something that wasn't shared, something that you have a question on or confused? I'll get clarification on that one bullet point that I mentioned, but like I said, it came from the recent data that I was reviewing versus something in our old guidance. Anne, is there a way that I can get that emailed out to the people
Yep,
or is it okay?
yeah,
We'll
I
get
will
that.
have everybody's
We'll
email
get that
from,
clarification.
yeah, when I send out certifications, I'll have, or certificate, excuse me, I'll have everybody's email. So I will CC you on that and then you can send information to that same group.
That sounds good. Anybody else have anything? I know we're right at 4:30 and I don't want to take up any more time with the sun falling as quickly as it is. So